Welcome back, folks, to episode 134 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast with me, your host, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and an adjunct professor at a local community college. What we're going to be discussing today is the idea of being better today than you were yesterday, becoming better than the self of yesterday, more correctly. And then we're going to throw another term in there that I need to discuss because it can also become a derail, a de facto distraction from what it is that would be our best effort at becoming that better self. And that's the term reinventing yourself. Now, in the idea of what we would call being better today than yesterday, being better than the self of yesterday, that actually points in the direction of not comparing yourself to other people's narratives, other people's accomplishments, other people's challenges, and saying, well, wow, they had it harder, man. I must not be doing so hot, or I might not be struggling as much, or worse yet, that I've got it worse than them, and I'm stuck in this comparative narrative that actually, if we really look at the principles, and Simon Sinek says it rather nicely, and he says that comparison is the thief of joy. And in some cases it can be, but it can also steal one other thing. And comparison can also be the thief of motivation, the motivation that can allow you to develop a discipline over time that can help you become that better individual today than you were yesterday, building on yesterday's foundations, not casting it off as if it's somehow a set of dirty clothes that you'll never wear again, or somehow some aspect of yourself that's dark and not worthy to keep on my shelves today. Not anything like that, but rather one where it's indicative of not only foundation growth, but also experiential growth that seeds my future growth of self, who I am today, and recognizing the validity and also the usefulness of our experiences and not tossing them away like, oh, that was the old me. That's not me anymore. And those are things that we hear very often out in the media, out in public, and we speak to each other. And even myself working within a clinical realm, I hear many people that struggle. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily a symptom of mental illness. It can be one of the subsymptoms within certain types of mental illness, but it sounds almost delusional to say that, well, that's not me anymore, when in fact it's really about the self-image that I carry and think of myself today, and how uncomfortable it is to compare it to yesterday, my own comparison to me. That's not the thief of joy. That's actually something that seeds truth, but rather using that as an escape mechanism and somehow maybe alleviating oneself of the concept of accountability or responsibility, even for those things that we're not particularly proud of. And that can be difficult. Now, to get more deeply into the idea of becoming better today than the self of yesterday, that is a sterling concept, and it's something that I encourage people to think about, because we're looking at the fact that yesterday was a foundation for today's growth, almost like a cicada that sheds its slough, its skin. And I love cicadas. I think they're amazing. They're noisy as all heck, but they're wonderfully prominent here in West Texas where I live. But whenever we hear the cicada song, we must understand that at some point they were in the dirt from 6 years up to 17 years. And when they break out, they have only a few hours to climb up in the heat, break out of that shell, and hopefully get an opportunity to dry their wings to where they're able to fly, or else they become bird food. Once they mate, that's about it. That's the end of their life cycle. So it's a very interesting thing. They became the highest version of their self for the most part, and there was risk along the way, not unlike the parallel to human life and who we become today versus who we were yesterday. Yesterday we were that little grub in the dirt, eating roots in the dark, not knowing better than finally that spark to grow happens over time. We mature, and then we break out of that ground, that first level of this is the new world, and I come out and I develop. I dry, I become stronger, and I solidify in those things that are going to be the me that's driving me forward from that point in the future. And I may leave behind memories of who it was whenever I was a little grub in the dirt, so to speak. Not that y'all are grubs, but hey, I like the metaphor, so we'll stick with that for now. And the idea is that had it not been for that grubby growth that we had when we were in the dirt, if we were our own little cicadas, so to speak, then we wouldn't be able to break out of the dirt and run the risk of flight and mating and sending the opportunity of our genetics and our genetic memory to go into the next generation. And that's fascinating. That's not so different from what human does, from what we do as individuals, but also in a more down-to-earth social scheme, what we do whenever we leave our home. Once we've grown or been raised, or we've had the good fortune of having, for instance, family or caring people to nurture us, and then we set off and we adventure, we seek, we wonder, and we find and try things that are great. Sometimes things aren't so great. But in the process of that growth and that wondering about where things are and wandering, wandering, we realize that there's seeking going on. We're trying to find that thing that either connects with us or somehow clicks with us, that gives us not only purpose but meaning. And those are important things. As a young man, I was always asking questions. I probably annoyed my family beyond belief, and there were things that I was trying to feel and seek and understand that was not within their wheelhouse to answer questions for. And going to school, same thing. I asked my teachers questions that were sometimes in the realm of their academic discipline. Sometimes it wasn't, but I was always wondering, what do you do with this? Can this help? Can we do that instead? And once again, process that a lot of people have. I was very silent about it, but whenever I would ask, sometimes I would ask questions that were beyond their capacity to answer. But whenever I got older and I wound up going into the military, it was an option that I had, but it wasn't the greatest option, but it was the option that I had to be able to get out of home and maybe run the risk of going to college. And I did have a very small college fund going to the military. I served during peacetime, and I was stationed at a big pink hospital in Honolulu, Hawaii, Triple Army Medical Center. And I was trained as a scrub tech, so I scrubbed in on all the C-sections and all the deliveries of babies during the time that I was there. And I was working close to 100-hour a week, so it kind of burned me out a little bit. But I will tell you what, the military provides you opportunities to become a better person than you were yesterday at every juncture, because it's always about see one, do one, teach one when it comes to skill building, and they move fast. And often there's a lot of practice of those skills that you develop. But on top of that, the culture encourages you to learn and to be teachable. And those are some good, useful things that can help you when you're seeking. Now, when I was that age, in my late teens, early 20s, I was very fortunate to learn martial art, Wing Chun, under my initial teacher, John S. Wong. And then I'm not going to mention my second teacher's name because he probably wouldn't like me to do that. But he taught me a method called Yi Li Chuan that had Tai Chi, Xing Yin, Bagua within it. And I started with the Tai Chi form, and that got me on my way in Kung Fu. But what I didn't realize is that the foundation was going to be with me, and here I am at age 59, probably about 40 years later, still practicing those methods. They haven't left me. I'm not a master by any stretch, but I am an instructor. I am a teacher, not ranked, but I teach people, and I'm good at what I do. But on top of that, I realized that all during that wandering phase, when I was trying to figure out what clicked with me, that clicked with me. I had to go overseas to find that, and the universe, I guess, set me up in a good way to wherever I was finding what I was seeking, and I brought it back home with me whenever I got out of the military. So what does that have to do with self-regulation? Well, I learned a lot about self-regulation by not being skilled in self-regulation, learning how to get out of bravado and putting on a show, learning how to manage one's physiological, my own states whenever under stress, and also learn to realize through the military, not just the martial arts, how to overcome my fear of heights, which is natural. I wasn't terrified of them, but I certainly didn't like them, and I have a great deal of respect for them, especially whenever you're balanced on a single rope that is across an expanse, wherever you're on your belly, a leg dangling down and one hooked, and you're pulling yourself across like a squirrel on a wire, and never having done that before, but seeing somebody do it and just doing basically monkey see, monkey do, and doing that at about 40 feet above the ground, and learning that you can do the Tarzan rope thing across an expanse of open space and a cargo net at the bottom, but that's about 30 feet down if you fall, and holding on for dear life, but realizing that that's the kind of commitment and also the kind of determination that's needed to get things done, not just in the military, but in life generally. And this is where we learn to realize what it is that we're capable of. One, how far can I go? Testing your limits. And sometimes being in a structured space, military in this case, helps you reach those limits. Sometimes there are people that don't need military type setting to push themselves. They have that discipline to want to seek and find what themselves, in quotes, means and what their limits are. What can they do? Is there something that they can't do? How far can they go? And that is an adventurer's call, mind you. And it doesn't always have to be physical things. It can be mentally, it can be educationally, it can be in principle, it can be philosophically, that you can stretch your limits. Now, as far as our existence and our being, there are definitely survival qualities that are involved. Now, I know that in the last episode of Running Man, I plugged Kung Fu Academic, and that's Dr. Veronica Partikova, and she is teaching some amazing Kung Fu, authentic Kung Fu. And the reason I mentioned this, again, is that she's very good at what she does, but if you have an opportunity to go to her website, she has a blog, Kung Fu Academic, and she speaks about her challenges getting from Czechia to Hong Kong, living there and moving to Thailand, and the challenges she went through. And I reread some of them yesterday, and it was very much a tearjerker for me because it reminded me of some of the challenges I had. They weren't identical. I will tell you that she had harder challenges that I had in some areas, but I tell you what, I totally understood. And it gave me a sense of comfort, wonder, but also compassion for the fact that she stayed true to Kung Fu. She didn't drop it whenever she had very little or nothing during her challenges, whenever she was living in very difficult situations. And that was not only heartwarming, but it was also bracing and encouraging, because that's the kind of determination that is needed. I'm not quoting here, but I will tell you that there's one aspect where she mentions that she had very little, but she had Kung Fu. And then her comment after that was, and there are some people that don't even have that. And I'll be very honest, it drew some tears for me, because in comparison to those that we walk around, there are those that have less. There are some that aren't able-bodied. There are some that are stuck and don't know what to do. And there are some that don't make it out because they choose, and this is something I see in my field very frequently, to not be here anymore. And I don't even want to say the term for this conversation, but some people don't even have what it is that we have. And we sometimes worry about how little we have, not realizing that we have an abundance of potential. Sometimes we have an abundance of knowledge. And sometimes we may not have an abundance of comfort or food or warmth, but yet we still, by determination, keep going. So in the process of seeking those things that click with us, we're actually evolving ourselves. We're unfolding those parts of ourselves that maybe we're not aware of existing until we meet certain challenges. And there are certain times whenever we get pushed to the limit, and this can happen in sparring, fighting. It can happen whenever you're swinging on a rope, or you're doing live fire exercises with live ammo with teams that you're hoping will be able to keep their muzzle discipline as well. That could very easily end a life. What you want to do is realize that aspects, by being aware, aspects of ourself start to show. We start realizing what it is, not only that we're really made of, but who it is in the truest sense, our most authentic aspect of ourself that we are in that moment, but not necessarily just in that moment, but realize that that's an underlying factor that is me always. Now, to get into the term reinventing myself, Now, this is something that Hollywood has really exaggerated and really taken and given it a Laffy-Taffy stretch in the sense that it's become such an archetypal thing. It's become this egregore, a mindset that people quickly pick up and speak about. And a lot of the self-help gurus talk about this, and I'm certainly not taking them to task. I think it's an excellent term to make the points that they make. But I think that it also points at a direction that potentially could be detrimental to us if we want to develop and become the fullest and most authentic self that we want to become literally the pinnacle of individual that we can become. And we don't truly reinvent ourselves in the sense that we're leaving this husk of individual, but rather maybe there's a concept, maybe a metaphor of a husk of individual self, aspects of self that are left behind. And whenever you stop behaving a certain way, does that mean that you are no longer the person that behaved the way that we no longer do? Well, if we think about it, this is a very Zen thing in that you look at the witness, and that's the part of yourself. And the happy term that we use now is meta thinking, and I laugh at that. And that's the new high tech way of looking at thinking about our own thinking. But that part of ourself, that's us that was looking out from the roots of our eyes, from the back of our eyes into a mirror whenever we're too young to recognize ourselves in that mirror before we realize that we had a self, before we even recognize that the words that they were telling us that we didn't know were sounds coming out of people's mouths that were actually maybe our name that we learned to associate by conditioning with who it is that's supposed to pay attention. That's me. And that individual observer within the self that has no voice, it has no words, but it is just our witnessing, our watching ourselves do. And this is where we watch our thoughts come up and then they go back down, where we can visualize and we're watching ourselves watch ourselves do stuff. That is the self. And that never changes. So to me, and this is my interpretation and an opinion, of course, but based on experience, it wasn't foolishly put together, is that whenever we start thinking about reinventing self, we're talking about really reinvention of a self-image that has to do with the social self, that part of us that we put out there that we want people to believe is us, when in actuality, it's really not us. That is merely a simulacrum of me. And that is, to use a science fiction term that my favorite author, Stephen Barnes, wrote in one of his books many years back, and I still use the term because I just loved it. But whenever we're looking at something that is pointing at who it is that I'm telling you I am, it's not really me. That is merely the artifice. That's the clothes. That's the mask. That's the hat I put on that I wear when I'm enacting a certain role. But when we talk about reinventing ourselves, we're really talking about evolving our lives. And very honestly, we point at the possibility of no longer being accountable or responsible for the weight of those things that I may have done that I'm not so proud of sometimes. This isn't a guilt shame talk, but rather recognizing that, yes, I've gone through stuff, but that doesn't mean to slog along carrying it like this bag of trash on my shoulder either. It's merely acknowledgement and recognition without attachment that we must do so we can move forward. That's part of self-regulation too, not getting hung up in the past and punishing ourselves unnecessarily for something we can't change anymore. If we've changed ourselves, okay, but we can't overemphasize, I can't overemphasize the fact that sometimes the self-image we want to buy into, we tend to exaggerate. We tend to hyperbolize in the sense that we want to almost make it like a superhero, who I'm going to be. But if you're really doing skills, learning physical skills, learning how to run, how to jump, how to swim, how to become better at what it is that you do within a discipline, you realize that it's not really a superhero thing. Now, you may get very, very familiar and really confident in what you do and become very skilled in what you deliver, and with a great deal of clarity, be able to teach it and get people to do as much as far as what you're teaching. And that's great. And to somebody that's an observer on the outside that has no skill, that is literally at the unconscious competent or the conscious incompetence rather, level of learning, then to them, that's like gold. I remember seeing my teachers that did martial art, and it's like, I want to do that. And it was exciting. It was motivating. But when it got to the work, it doesn't feel exciting and motivating. It feels like hard work. It feels like effort. And basically hard work, discipline, hard work over time is technically what Kung Fu means. So, yes, it is definitely an interesting concept, but we can also get lost in it to the point that we become less accountable and responsible if we allow ourselves to do that. And that is unwise in my estimation, my opinion, professional and personal, but also in my experience. So, what I would like to tell you is that I certainly appreciate your time today. We had an interesting discussion today, and I want to tell you thank you. Thank you for listening to the Running Man podcast, and please go to YouTube and like, subscribe, and share. Give it to people. I'd love for this channel to grow, and that is at Running Man Self-Regulation Skills Project podcast on YouTube, and it's available on all platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and everywhere you can find your podcasts. And I certainly have enjoyed talking about this because this is all very close and personal to me, but it's also something that we as humans, when I reach out to y'all have reached out to me as well. I appreciate that. We intersect. We intersect within the human experience, and we want to become better. We want to become that better, more authentic self, who it is that I really am, versus getting stuck in who I want people to think I am and then feel like you're left empty-handed because, oh, that wasn't really me. Self-regulation is about recognizing where to put the effort and where to avoid falling into the pitfalls of reinvention of self, and realize that that wonderful aspect of you that people want to experience is that authentic you. And please nurture that. Take care of that. And thank you for your time. And take care. Walk well.